Samach Zayin. The end of Samach Vav, we were in the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel. Rabbi Yochanan says that you can make you can be mevatel your reshus. Rabbi Yochanan says that you can be mevatel reshus from one chutzner to another chutzner. That means that you can relinquish your rights to the space within your courtyard, even to the people of another courtyard. And also you can relinquish your rights in a shared churva, in a shared ruin. The basis of the discussion of this relinquishing the rights from one courtyard to another is that Shmuel holds that you need both components, that you could have made an Eruv before Shabbos, and the fact that you did not make an Eruv prohibits the other people from carrying into the courtyard or from the courtyard to the house, and therefore you can relinquish your property to them, your rights to the courtyard to them for the Shabbos. However,
why does that
you don't need both of those components. It's enough to have one of the components, as we'll see today in the Gemara. It's enough to have either that you could relinquish, that you could make an Eruv together before Shabbos, or that that the fact that you didn't make an Eruv would prohibit the others from carrying. Both of those, either of those, is sufficient for you to be allowed. If you didn't do it, then you're going to be allowed to relinquish your rights to them. And we had 4 scenarios of someone having forgotten to participate in the Eruv. 4 scenarios of someone having forgotten to participate in an Eruv by 2 courtyards, one inside the other, where in order to get through the inner courtyard, the members of the inner courtyard have to be able to walk through the outer courtyard, and by doing so, essentially are a part of the outer courtyard. And if they didn't join in the Eruv with the outer courtyard, there's in about a week we're going to see a three-way machlokas in the Gemara how to define that. Can they carry in their own space? Do they invalidate the outer courtyard and therefore can't carry in their own space either? In any case, what relates to our Gemara is the statements of Rava in regards to this statement of Shmuel, that if the breads are in the outer courtyard, meaning everybody's meals are in the outer courtyard, so regardless of whether the person forgot to join in the outer courtyard, or the person that forgot to join in is in the inner courtyard, there's no way to separate the two. Since the people in the inner courtyard have to be able to go out, so he can't relinquish his rights to just his courtyard, because the people walking through have to be able to go out, and the Eruv is not in the inner courtyard, so they can't separate themselves, and therefore it's not going to be valid. If the bread is in the outer courtyard, if the bread is in the inner courtyard and someone from the outer courtyard has someone in the inner courtyard has forgotten to join, so he can't relinquish to the outer courtyard. He can only relinquish to his own courtyard, and people in the outer courtyard cannot separate themselves because the bread's not by them. However, what we're up to today is if the bread is in the inner courtyard and someone from the inner courtyard forgot to join in, that then he can relinquish. And someone in the outer courtyard forgot to join in, so then the inner courtyard can separate itself, and therefore they'd be able to carry in their courtyard to their house and vice versa. Yes, you have your hand raised.
Yes. Could you explain? I mean, I know that it works. That bittul works.
Sorry.
Why does it work?
Try that again.
Yeah, I know that bittul works, but I have no idea why it works. What's the theory behind it that makes it work? What's the mechanics?
So the mechanics are like this. The way the Eruv works is that even though, well, to start off with, on a Torah level, this is a private domain. It's enclosed. The fact that it is a right of way to multiple households does not make it a public domain. However, it looks like a public domain, and so the Chachamim prohibited carrying from the house into it and vice versa. The Eruv, what the Eruv does is, since everybody joins a meal and they put the meal into one of the households, essentially what that does is it makes it into one household. It no longer looks like a multiple household courtyard. It actually is a single household courtyard by putting all the meals into one house, and so everybody's a part of one large family, and they are simply the guests of that family walking in. However, if one person forgot to make an Eruv, then meaning they forgot to join in the meal, so now you still have to have the communal household of everybody joining in the Eruv, and the individual household of the one who forgot to put in the Eruv. By them relinquishing the rights of the courtyard, their own rights in the courtyard, now they have, to the group, now we're back to having a single entity as having ownership of the courtyard, and it's no longer looking like a public domain. Clear?
Yeah, I mean, they're part of the group. They don't have their own domicile, so to speak.
They don't have their own rights in the courtyard. It's not two entities having rights in the courtyard. It's one entity. The communal space.
They have still rights to the communal space.
They've relinquished their rights to the community.
I mean, do they partake in the meal?
They didn't join in the meal. If somebody wants, they can share with them. They don't partake in the meal, and they can't carry from their house into the courtyard. Everyone else can. They can't.
Okay. So all they're doing is making it work for everybody else, but nothing works for them.
Correct. But either way, they couldn't carry from the public, from the courtyard to their house and back. So the top of Samach Zayin Amid Aleph, Shachach Erod Min HaChitzono, if the Eruv is in the inner courtyard, and the person who forgot the Eruv is in the outer courtyard, and he didn't make an Eruv, Vadai Pnimis Muteris, then the inner courtyard can separate itself off, and they can carry from their public domain, from their courtyard to their house, and vice versa. Nachtadasha Mishtamsha, because they could close the door and use this space. But the outer courtyard is going to be prohibited on account of that the outer courtyard somebody there did not participate in the Eruv, and so that ruins it for everyone. And in this, Shmuel is going to agree that the inner courtyard, that the outer courtyard members can relinquish their rights to their very own courtyard. So that the inner courtyard people can continue to walk through the outer courtyard, but it's all one entity, the entity of the inner courtyard. The outer courtyard no longer has its own entity because somebody there forgot the Eruv. Now, even though that normally we say that it's one entity because they walk through there, they can say, as this concept, which we're going to see later in about a week, that they can say to each other, our partnership is litakuni, to make it better for us, but not for our detriment. And if our partnership with you, our courtyard with your courtyard, is to our detriment because somebody over there in your courtyard forgot to make an Eruv, forgot to put in a bread, to that we're not joining in your with you, and we can accept your relinquishment of the rights to our courtyard. After all, even though that Shmuel holds you cannot relinquish rights from one courtyard to the other, but really what that relinquishing is, the outer courtyard is relinquishing the rights to their very own outer courtyard to the members of the inner courtyard whose connection is on account of their outer courtyard usage. Amalei Ravuna b'Rei Rishua l'Rava. So Ravuna, the son of Rishua, said to Rava, "V'chishachach echad min hapnimis v'lo irev amay shtein asuras." One of the cases was that if the inner courtyard member, if one of the inner courtyard members forgot to make an eruv, it's going to be prohibited. Both cannot carry. The inner courtyard cannot carry because one of their members didn't join in the eruv. The outer courtyard cannot separate themselves, cannot make an eruv because somebody in the inner courtyard, which has rights to the outer courtyard by passing through it, didn't join in the eruv. So why can't we say livatel bar penimis lebnei penimis? You're right. Shmuel says that the inner courtyard member cannot relinquish his rights to the outer courtyard members, but he could relinquish his rights to the inner courtyard members, to his partners, and therefore let him relinquish his rights to the inner courtyard, and let the outer courtyard members, and let them come and join in with the inner courtyard members that do have an opinion, do have rights now because one of their fellow members relinquished their rights there. So the Gemara says, "Kaman Rabbi Eliezer." You're following the opinion of Rava, says to Rav Huna, Rei Rishua. You're asking according to Rabbi Eliezer, who says the he doesn't have to relinquish his rights to all the possible members, all the possible users. He can relinquish to some, and then the others can join in with the ones that he relinquished to. However, Kika Amina, and I've said this in this explanation of Shmuel, l'Rabbanan, according to Rabbanan, the Amri that you have to relinquish your rights. When you relinquish your rights, it can't just be to one person. It has to be to all the possible members of that space. And you can't just relinquish to one and then everybody else join with that one person. The Gemara now tells a story of Rav Chisda and Rav Sheshes encountering each other. Rav Chisda was the student of Rav Sheshes, who was Rav Sheshes was blind. Rav Chisda, so Gemara says, Rav Chisda and Rav Sheshes kipagi ba'adadi. Rav Chisda and Rav Sheshes, when they would encounter each other, so Rav Chisda merasan sifvase mimasnaita the Rav Sheshes. He was always nervous. His lips would quiver on account of his nervousness of Rav Sheshes asking about Mishnah. Rav Sheshes, even though that he was, perhaps because he was blind, but he was blind, had a very broad grasp, a memory of all of the Mishnayos and Brises and so on, and would always ask contradictions between one Mishnah and another Mishnah, between one Mishnah and Brisa. Rav Sheshes, Marta Kuligufe, and Rav Sheshes his whole body would shake would tremble from his students' sharp analysis, that he would always ask difficult questions to respond to. The Gemara is saying that they recognized each other's strength, one in the breadth of knowledge and one in the depth of analysis. In any case, in this encounter, Rav Chisda asked Rav Sheshes, you have two houses on either side of a Torah level public domain. You can't carry from the house into the public domain, that's for sure, on Shabbos. And then, a road crew showed up on Shabbos, and they set up barriers in order to do some construction. And what happens essentially is that these two houses are now fully enclosed in four walls on Shabbos. Can they now carry from one place to another, from their house to their now current courtyard, what used to be a public domain but is now closed off to the public because of this fence? Now, according to the opinion, it says that Shmuel says that you cannot relinquish your rights from one courtyard to another courtyard. So these two houses on either side of the public domain, they're not one courtyard. Those are two separate courtyards, obviously. So you cannot relinquish your rights from one side to the other. So, I have no question. If they had one in a general two courtyard space, where if they wanted to, they could have made an Eruv before Shabbos, and yet they didn't make an Eruv, and because they didn't make an Eruv, you don't allow for them to relinquish rights from one to the other, even though that they could have made an Eruv together before Shabbos. Here in this case, if they had wanted to make an Eruv before Shabbos, they couldn't, because at the onset of Shabbos there was a public domain between them. They couldn't make an Eruv from one to the other. For sure, you couldn't relinquish your rights on Shabbos from one to the other. As we said, Shmuel has two requirements. It has to be that you could have made an Eruv together, and if you didn't make an Eruv, you prohibit the other from carrying. Over here, these two are so separated that not only do they not prohibit each other, one can make an Eruv and it wouldn't affect the other at all. They also, if they tried to make an Eruv at the onset of Shabbos, they couldn't. So for sure, you could not relinquish rights from one to the other. So the question is according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that you could relinquish your rights from one courtyard to another. So courtyard A's members can relinquish their rights of their courtyard to courtyard B and then join in their Eruv. Hasam there, at least you have one requirement that Shmuel had required. Rabbi Yochanan would require at least that you could have made an Eruv before Shabbos if you wanted. But over here, where at the onset of Shabbos you could not have made an Eruv together because there was a public domain, a public thoroughfare that went through between this space. So of course you could not have made an Eruv. And therefore you also cannot relinquish your rights now that magically you had a fence come up on Shabbos. Perhaps, there's no distinction. And essentially the question is, does Rabbi Yochanan say you can just relinquish your rights on Shabbos as long as there is some sort of connection, regardless of any connection at the onset of Shabbos, or does he require some sort of connection? It doesn't have to have both of the requirements that Shmuel said, that you could make an Eruv together, and if you didn't make an Eruv, if one made an Eruv and the other didn't, it would invalidate the Eruv on account of the other didn't make the Eruv. That's two requirements Shmuel requires. And Rabbi Yochanan would require one of those two. And either one is sufficient to say that you can relinquish your rights. But in this case, neither is true. At the onset of Shabbos, you couldn't make an Eruv. And if one had made an Eruv by themselves, the others in non-participation would not have impacted whatsoever. And therefore, perhaps you cannot relinquish your rights. So as Amar Lei, Rav Sheshus responded to Rav Chisda, Ein mevatlin. You're right. In such a case, Rabbi Yochanan would agree that you cannot relinquish your rights. Rabbi Yochanan requires at least one of these two requirements. Either that they could have made an Eruv together before Shabbos, or that their non-participation in the other's Eruv would prohibit them from carrying in their own space. Meis Nachri b'Shabbos. In our Mishnah, we had a scenario where there was a non-Jew living in the same courtyard as Jews that wanted to make an Eruv, and they have to that would invalidate the Eruv because obviously there's a second entity there, and they would have to lease the space from the non-Jew in the courtyard. What happens if they didn't do so? So they can't carry. Now, mid-Shabbos, that non-Jew dies. Can they now carry for the rest of Shabbos? Can they say, look, all of a sudden there's only one entity here? So according to the opinion that says, that we saw earlier, that you can lease the space, which we saw earlier. There was a question: can you lease the space on Shabbos? And that was a case where the non-Jew showed up in the middle of Shabbos. So you can lease the space from them, and then everybody relinquish their rights to everyone else, to that space, to the renter. So over here, if over there you can do too, for sure over here, where all you need, you don't have to lease the space. All you have to do is relinquish your rights, and that would be sufficient. So no question. If you could do both over there, the leasing and the relinquishing of the rights to the rest of the group, just relinquishing the rights to the rest of the group for sure is permissible. But according to the opinion that says that you could not lease from the non-Jew on Shabbos, over here where you don't have to lease because they are no longer an entity. So perhaps you can just relinquish the rights to each other or to the group and then carry in there. Perhaps you can't do both, but one could be done. Or perhaps there's no distinction. So Amar Lei, Rav Sheshis responded to Rav Chisda's second question, and he said, Ani Omer Mevatl. So I say that you could relinquish rights to each other and make it one entity, and the non-Jew space is no longer a factor. And over there, and the reason is because over here at the onset of Shabbos, they could have leased the space from him and made an Eruv, and therefore at the onset of Shabbos it was valid. The fact over there, the non-Jew wasn't there at the onset of Shabbos, so you couldn't lease the space from him. He showed up on Shabbos. Over here, where the non-Jew was here at the onset of Shabbos, you could have leased the space and you could have made an Eruv, and therefore on Shabbos, when the hindrance is no longer there, and the hindrance here being that there was a non-Jew whose space was not leased, that's not a factor anymore because he died, and therefore you can relinquish the rights. However, Rav Hamnuna was a colleague of Rav Sheshis, Amar Ein Mevatlin. He says no, that even in such a case you cannot relinquish rights to each other and then create a group and a single entity and carry, since you could not have made an Eruv alone. You can only have made an Eruv at the onset of Shabbos after you have leased the space, but you never leased the space. So at the onset of Shabbos, you couldn't make an Eruv. So now, too, you cannot make the Eruv either. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Nachri sheyesh Pesach arba al arba pasuach labika. Essentially, we have the non-Jew who is in this courtyard together with his Jewish neighbors, right? So you have a courtyard here, and the main entrance to the courtyard is through the alleyway, which comes off the public domain, and therefore is you'd have to make an Eruv, and the non-Jew you'd have to lease a space. However, if the non-Jew from his own private backyard, from his own private space, he has an opening of 4 tefachim high by 4 tefachim wide, which is really very small. It's a 12 by 12, just a small sort of like a cellar door, a trap door, whatever, but it's enough of an opening that he can open to a wide open field. So then the halacha is going to be that that counts as their main entrance, because they like to have their private entrance to and from their space where they can put in packages and so on. Even though the Gemara is going to tell us the main functionally, when they're coming with their animals, the only way they can really do it is through the main way. Even though the entire day he's coming in and out with their donkeys or with their camels and with their wares through the alleyway, because that's the way that it's going to fit. But since they have their own space and their own entryway, that is a separation from the rest of the courtyard and from the rest of the alleyway, and they don't have to lease a space.
But a person can't fit through that.
It's not about, well, a person could technically fit through that if they're crawling through, but it's not about that. It's that they can put their packages through there. They have their own space. They have their own entryway to their space. That's enough to that they feel like and they want to have their own unique entryway should they need it. And therefore it doesn't prohibit it from the rest of the mavoi, from carrying. In other words, they've separated themselves from the mavoi with their own separate entryway. They like it because it's Rashi says it just gives them their freedom, their airspace. That's unique to them. Having your own entryway makes it unique and happy, and that's sufficient to separate one person from the rest of the alleyway.
Before we get to the next case, I didn't understand what was the significance of the fact that it was open to a bika,
as opposed to the next case, where it's open not to an open field, but to an enclosed storage area. Also a large space, but not open to free space, but open to a storage area, which is a karpef. If it's open to not to an open field, but to a storage area, a wood storage area, this nice large space, maybe enclosed, but it's not as free of a space as the rest. From the teaching is in the academy from generation to generation. And now we go to Samach Zayin at base 67b. He says even if it's open to a karpef as well, that's going to be a significant opening that they like, because it's their unique opening to a large space, and it gives them their own ear and their unique opening, and therefore they're going to be separate from the alleyways. Other inhabitants, and they don't have to participate in the Eruv. They don't have to relinquish their rights. Their space does not have to be leased from them. So here we're going to have a machlokas depending on how large this space is. The doorway is open to this karpef. How large this space is going to be. So Rabbi Yosef Damar Tavai, they both say, Nachri Beisasayim Oser, Yosef Beisasayim Ein Oser, that if this opening is to a karpef, to this storage area that is 70 by 70 and change, and from there it is open to, and they also have an opening to the alleyway. So then they're going to be a part of the alleyway, and not a part, and this doesn't separate them because they have the opening to the karpef, to this wood storage area, and the reason is because it's not a large enough karpef. It's too small. As we've seen, generally a karpef is going to be larger than that, and then actually you cannot carry within the karpef that's larger than that. But the wood storage area that they have their own unique opening to It's true they can pull wood in there from the wood storage area to their house, but it's not open enough, like we saw the first halacha, which was that it was open to an open field that gives them their own airspace and their own freedom. Here, it's open to a pretty small space. It's a carpet of 2 saw or less, meaning a 70 by 70 or 71 and change, whatever. It's 70 by 70, and that's small enough that it's not going to be significant that they have their own opening there, and they won't. That doesn't count as a separation from the mavui. However, if their airspace in their karpef, their unique opening goes to a karpef, to a wood storage area that's larger than Beis Hasayim, larger than 70 by 70 and change, there it's large enough for them to value it as a separate space, and therefore they will be separate from the rest of the mavui, and they would not prohibit the rest of the mavui from making an eruv by themselves. However, if it's a Jew, it's the other way around. V'Yisrael Beis Hasayim ein oseh. And for a Jew who has an opening to a private opening to a carpet behind his house, and he made and that carpet is less than 70 by 70. So and he forgot, and he didn't make an eruv, so he didn't participate in the eruv of the rest of the mavui. So he has a usable space on Shabbos because it's the halacha is in regards to carrying. As we mentioned, if the karpef is larger than Beis Hasayim, since it's not made for dwelling, it's not a dwelling space, but rather it's a storage space. So only if it's less than Beis Hasayim can it be included in your Shabbos space and you can carry there. If it's larger than that, it would actually invalidate an eruv, and you cannot carry in there, only 4 amos. So it's only a valuable space for the Jew on Shabbos, and the separate opening is only of any significance if it's less than 70 by 70, if it's 70 and 70 and less. But if it's any more than that, it's actually of no significance to the Jew. And so when does it count as a separation from the rest of the alleyway? Only if it's smaller than Beis Hasayim. Because for the Jew, that's the only value he's going to have in a carpet. However, Yosim and Beis Hasayim, if it's larger Beis Hasayim, so then it actually doesn't count as any significance whatsoever. The small door that he has opening to this to the storage area doesn't count on Shabbos because he can't carry into there in any case, and so he's back to being a part of the alleyway, and he didn't participate in the eruv, so it invalidates the rest of the eruv. He asked of Rav Huna, Pasuach lekarpef ma'u. The non-Jew's space that is open to a karpef. What's the halach? So you say, well, I don't understand. Amalei harei amru Beis Hasayim so Yosef Beis Hasayim ein oseh. We just said that if it's larger than a Beis Hasayim, it's larger than the 70 by 70. So then we say that's a significant airspace. So it's a significant opening, a free, independent opening for his particular space, and therefore he's no longer a part of the mavui, a part of the alleyway. If it's less than that, it's not significant, and he's a part of the alleyway, and they have to lease from him. And if they didn't, it would invalidate the eruv. Amar Ula Amar Rav Yochanan. Ula said in the name of Rav Yochanan, Karfa Yosef Beis Hasayim Shalehukaf Ladira. Any storage area that's enclosed, which essentially is a private domain. But however, since it's larger than Beis Hasayim, it looks and acts like a public domain because it's not made for living. So it doesn't look like a private domain because it's not living space. And it's so large that it looks like it's a public right of way. So even though that it's a storage area, you may not carry in there. The Chachamim prohibited it. And even if it's so large that it is not only a 70 by 70, but it's 200, 300 by 300, so it's a large area. Nevertheless, it remains on a Torah level a private domain. even though you're not allowed to carry in there rabbinically, on account of that, it's so large and it's not made for private dwelling. It's not made as a dwelling space. Therefore, it doesn't have the status of a private domain in regards to Shabbos. You cannot carry in there. But if you carry from a public domain into there, then you've actually transgressed the Torah prohibition of carrying from a private domain to a public domain to a private domain. Because even though you're not allowed to carry in there, because to some people it may seem like a public domain, on a Torah level, it's actually a private domain. It's an enclosed space. And even though that it's hundreds of feet by hundreds of feet, it's going to be prohibited on a Torah level, and that would be a Torah transgression of carrying. And you have to bring a chatas, a sin offering, if somebody carried from there, my timer, because what's the reason? Because it actually has a full enclosure, the walls. What it's missing really is an inhabitant space. It wasn't enclosed for the sake of dwelling, so it doesn't look like, or in the people's mind may not feel like, a private domain. Masa Rav Huna Bachina asked a question in regards to the size of a rock, an island in water, whether or not you can carry in there. Water has the halacha of a carmelis. It's this in-between space. It's not a private domain, obviously. It's also not a public thoroughfare. So it's this in-between space, the carmelis, and the Chachamim prohibited carrying in there for amas. There's a rock as an island in the middle. So it depends. If it's less than 10 tefachim above the water level, the Sarah Shabiyah. So if it's less than 10 tefachim from the water level, so then it's like the water level. However, if it's Gava Asara, if it's 10 tefachim off of the water level, V'rachib Arba, and it's at least 4 tefachim wide, so it can be a small rock. You can't carry from the rock into the sea. And not from the sea into onto this rock, because it is now more. It's 10 tefachim above the ground, so it counts as its own space. That's a private domain. It's 10 tefachim high, 4 tefachim wide. It's going to be a private domain. And you're carrying from a carmelis to a rishus hayachid, from a rabbinic public domain to a oraisa private domain, and it's going to be prohibited to carry. Pachas mikan metaltali. However, if it's not 10 tefachim high, as we said, you could carry from the sea to the island and back, because it is like the sea. They're both a carmelis, so it's really a part of it. And as long as it's within 4 amos, it's 6 feet, you can carry from one to the other. Ad kama. How large can this island be that you can carry? That we can call it a carmelis, a private space, a rabbinic space that you can carry from the sea onto the island, these 4 tefachim. Ad kama, ad beis hasayim. As long as it's not larger than 70 by 70 amos, like we said, a beis hasayim. Ahai. What are we talking about? Ilay mas seifa. Are we talking about that it's less than 10 tefachim high? So it's really a part of the sea, and it's a carmelis. So they're both a carmelis. So beis hasayim tfeiloi, it's only up to 70 by 70, not any larger. Why? After all, since it's not 10 tefachim off of the sea, above the sea, so essentially it's just a part of the sea. And it's a carmelis either way. So you can carry within a carmelis, you're allowed to carry 4 amos. But the carmelis kamataltel. He's carrying from one carmelis to the other. And you're allowed to carry 4 amos within a carmelis. And we'll have Aresha. Must be it's talking about the upper, the first case, the head of the Mishnah, of the Brisa. This is what it says. The rock that's in the sea, that's more than 10 tefachim above the sea level, 10 and it's 4 tefachim wide. You're not allowed to carry from the sea onto this rock because it's a private domain, and not from the rock onto the sea because it's a private domain. However, va'ad kama, how large can this rock be? and count as a private domain on a Torah, and therefore you're not allowed to carry from the sea into the onto this private domain. Rad kama ad beis hasayim, only up to say a planting area, which is 70 by 70 or 100 by 50. Or yesame beis hasayim. But if it's any larger metaltal, you're allowed to carry from the sea onto this rock, because then it also counts as a carmelis, as a rabbinically, as a rabbinic space. Alma carmelisi. So we see that that a place that has a 10 tfachim fence that's larger than 70 by 70 does not count as a reshus hayachid, as a private domain. It counts as a rabbinic public domain, a carmelis. To Yufta Rabbi Yochanan, that seems a contradiction to Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rava Mandali Yada Terutzim Esnita to Yufta Ma'asav Le Rabbi Yochanan. Somebody who can't explain a Mishnah is then therefore going to ask a question from it on Rabbi Yochanan. Lala Maresha. Really, we can explain this is going on the first part of the Mishnah, first part of this brisa that said that the rock is this island is more than 10 tefachim off of the sea level, and therefore it's an independent private space, reshus hayachid. V'achi kamar, and this is what it means: b'teichoy metaltalin, within the island itself, you can carry. It's a private domain. V'ad kama, and how large can the island be that you're allowed to carry within its space? Ad beis hasayim, that the island is up to 100 by 50 or 70 by 70, because then it's a private domain and you can carry anywhere on the island. However, if it's larger than that, now it has the halacha of a private of a rabbinic public domain, of a carmelis, and you're not allowed to carry in it any more than 4 amos. Rav Ashi Amar Lo Lamar Reisha Heinamru Veheinamru. Rav Ashi says no. It's really talking about the first case. The island is more than 10 tefachim off the ground, and you are right that it's considered a private domain. And once it becomes 70 by 70, it's considered a carmelis, a mid space. So then, but if it's really on a Torah level a private domain, so how can you carry from the sea, which is a rabbinic public domain, onto the island, which is a oraisa level private domain? They, the Chachamim, enacted that the sea counts as a public domain, and they enacted that the island is also going to be considered a public domain in regards to rabbinic public domains, and you can carry from one to the other. They're the ones that said that if it's larger than 70 by 70, even though that it's enclosed, since it's not made for dwelling, you cannot carry in there more than 4 amos. And they're the ones that said that you cannot carry from a Torah level private domain to a carmelis, this mid space, a rabbinic public domain. And therefore they said, if it's less than 70 by 70, the shari litel tule bekula, since you're allowed to carry in the entire space, so everybody realizes that it is a private domain. So the Chacham said, we can't have you carry from that private domain that everybody knows is a private domain, because you can carry all around it into the sea or vice versa, because everybody considers the sea a public way. Because the island is a private domain in every way. However, but if it's larger than 70 by 70, where now you're not allowed to carry on the island, only 4 amos. So it acts, even though that on a Torah level it's a private domain, but rabbinically it acts as a public domain. There the Chachamim said you can carry from the sea into it and vice versa. Because if you prohibit that, the Chachamim were concerned people will carry around the entire island. And what's the issue? So what? So let him carry throughout the inside. That's shechiach. That's a common thing. But from the sea to carry onto an island, that's not common. And as we know, the Chachamim made their enactments for the most common scenarios and not for the less common scenarios. Have a great day.
Thank you.